Hello Revolution students, and welcome back to another video on the Chinese Revolution, Area of Study 1. In this video we are going to look at the Red Army and how they contributed to the eventual victory of the Communists in China in 1949 during the Revolution. So let us get into it. The first key point is an obvious one. The Red Army defended the CCP and enabled the CCP to impose and increase its authority in China. Very early on, Mao Zedong recognized the necessity of having an army to defend the CCP and impose its political program within China. And he summed it up in this very, very famous quote, which he made on the 7th of August 1927. And he wrote, "Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun." So within China, without a gun, you could have no political power. And there are numerous examples of the Red Army defending the CCP against Kuomintang attacks, as well as the Japanese too. And you would have come across these in your study of China Area Study 1. So we've got from the beginning Jingjiangshan, then following on to the Jiangxi Soviet during the encirclement campaigns when the GMD tried to destroy the Jiangxi Soviet. They eventually did. By 1934, which caused the CCP and the Red Army to flee from the Jiangxi Soviet and begin that very famous Long March, and then where they ended up at the Yan'an Soviet, where the CCP stayed from pretty much December 1935 right up until 1947 into and during the Civil War. Mao also identified the necessity of the Red Army in achieving victory in the revolution in China in his account of the Long March and the role that the Red Army played in the Long March. Well, has there ever been in history a Long March like ours? No, never. The Long March is a manifesto. It proclaims to the world that the Red Army is an army of heroes and that the imperialists and their jackals, Chiang Kai-shek and his like, are perfect non-entities. The Long March is also an agitation corps. It declares to approximately 200 million people of 11 provinces that only the Red Army leads to their liberation. So what he is arguing there, it is only the Red Army that is going to free the Chinese people from the exploitation of the landlords of the Kuomintang and of the Japanese invaders. The Long March is also a seeding machine. It has sown seeds in 11 provinces which will sprout, grow leaves, blossom into flowers, bear fruit and yield a crop in the future. To sum up, the Long March ended with victory for us and defeat for the enemy. All right, let's keep going. Mao recognized that the CCP needed the support of the Chinese people, and the Red Army played a key role in gaining that support from the people. He wrote, "The former, the people, may be likened to water, the latter, Red Army guerrillas, to the fish who inhabit it." So in Mao's idea of guerrilla warfare, his strategy for guerrilla warfare, he argued you needed the Red Army, but you also needed the people, and that the Red Army needed the support of the people in order to survive. Okay, now let's have a look at the role that the Red Army played in increasing support for the CCP amongst the people. And they did this in a number of ways. One way they did this was through their discipline. Mao Zedong introduced a number of rules on discipline in order to make sure that the Red Army behaved and treated the people fairly. He wrote the 3 main rules of discipline, and one of the most famous ones of those, within those 3 main rules, was do not take a single needle or piece of thread from the masses. And he also wrote the 8 points for attention, and one of those being pay fairly for what you buy. These were crucial in fostering an image of the Red Army soldiers as honourable and valiant. And Helen Snow, the wife of Edgar Snow, that famous writer who wrote Red Star over China, she said about the Red Army soldiers, she called them Prince Valiants in straw sandals. And that pretty much summed up the view of many within China towards the Red Army soldiers as being honourable and as being supportive of the people. The Red Army soldiers also increased support for the CCP by working with the people and by implementing the mass line. Red Army soldiers worked with peasants in their spare time. At Yunnan, for example, they helped peasants to till the land, harvest grain, and construct irrigation channels. And I have a quote here from Mao Zedong about the mass line and how it worked with the people. We should go to the masses and learn from them, synthesize their experience into better articulated principles and methods, then do propaganda among the masses and call upon them to put these principles and methods into practice so as to solve their problems and help them achieve liberation and happiness. And the Red Army soldiers were key to implementing this mass line. And the Red Army's implementation of the mass line, of working with the people, of treating the people fairly, led to a phenomenal increase in their numbers. So you can see there, in 1937, there were 92,000, an estimated 92,000 Red Army soldiers. But by 1945, that had increased up to 860,000 soldiers. Okay, let's now look at a couple of historical interpretations about the Red Army and how they contributed to the 1949 revolution. And our first historical interpretation is from Morris Meisner, and he writes, the principles of guerrilla warfare that Mao Zedong and Zhu De originated at Jinggangshan were developed and tested on a far greater scale during the early 1930s. Perhaps most important, the communists learned essential lessons about the preconditions for the political and social mobilisation of the peasantry. They learned, and this is a key point here, they learned that the prerequisite for agrarian revolution was the military predominance of the Red Army and the security it guaranteed. For the peasants were willing to sacrifice to change the conditions under which they lived, but not in situations they perceived to be hopeless and feared retribution from the forces of counter-revolution. Okay, let us now look at our second historical interpretation, and it is from Philip Short, and he writes, to that end, Mao announced two policies which laid the basis for a very different army from any other existing in China at that time. In the first place, it was to be an all-volunteer force. Any man who wished to leave, Mao told them, was free to do so and would be given money for the journey. Those who stayed were promised that officers would no longer be permitted to beat them, and that soldiers' committees would be formed in each unit to ventilate grievances and ensure that democratic practices were followed. Secondly, Mao said, the soldiers would be required to treat civilians correctly. That is the key point there. They must speak politely, pay a fair price for what they bought, and never take so much as a solitary sweet potato belonging to the masses. In a country which lived by the aphorism, do not waste good iron making nails, nor good men as soldiers, where a good army merely took what it wanted and a bad army marauded, looted, burned, raped and killed, and where officers routinely employed barbaric methods of discipline, this was a genuinely revolutionary concept. Okay, that is my video on the Red Army and how it contributed to the 1949 revolution. I hope you have found it useful for your study of the Chinese Revolution, Area Study 1, and I shall see you next time. Goodbye.